engineering roles. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to bring someone who will take classes in data engineering. Then we also have the Azure AI Fundamentals. I will take this class when we're done with the Azure AZ900. And I'm expecting that by then, a lot of us will have passed these exams and then plan to write the AI 900 exam. Then I also have a friend coming to take the security path for those interested in security. You can take this and just pick any other one. You can take, after finishing the Azure Fundamentals, you can decide to choose any other one, and then specialize more. This Azure Fundamentals gives you a broad explanation to what Azure is all about. It's like the foundation, the building block of Azure. So more people have joined. I just want to ask, do we have people who want to ask questions? Is there anything in the chat? Is there any link for hands-on training after passing the Azure Fundamentals? What do you mean by hands-on training, please? Yemisi, can you explain? Is Yemisi in the call? You want practical training. If you go through the learning module on Microsoft Learn, there are some exercises there. That's just part of the practical that you need to focus on. If you go through the learning module, I can still drop the link for you. If you go through the learning module, there are exercises there that, as you do them, those are the the practicals that you expect. And then in the class, if you have questions, you just bring them up, and then we'll look at them together. If you have any technical question, I would drop the link in the chat for anybody who wants that. Any more questions? So how has it been? I just want us to interact today. I just want to know, how has it been for us? You think it's doable? The house is quiet. Okay, people are shy to talk. I can see some messages in the chat. All right. Yeah, I think it's doable. 2024 is here. It's starting off well. If you study every day for 1 hour, you can do your exams by the end of January. So if you study every day for the next, can do your exam for the next 3-4 weeks. There are other skills that goes with the cloud skill, other skills around troubleshooting, understanding the use of other software. We're going to take all of that. I am conscious of all that is needed, but I just also don't want to leave others behind, those who are pretty much just trying to understand what it is to get into IT. But like I said, it's a commitment I'm trying to give myself for the next 12 months. And I believe God can help us. I am very, very much positive about that. Very much positive about that. So, sure, we can all see my slides now. I want to continue from where we stopped last week. I decided that it's good to have a better overview of the different segments of the exams that we need to be aware of. When I went through the Microsoft Learn materials, I found that it was, separated in these three categories. To describe cloud concepts, you must be able to do that. We started with that since the start of the class, and that will constitute 25 to 30% of your questions. You must be able to describe the architecture of Azure and its services. You also must be able to describe how to manage and the governance that goes with Azure. That's the management side, the financial aspect, right? Because it's all about money. So I just want you to have these. You can take notes, but I'm going to share the slides too later so we can follow through. But this is very critical to know these. In terms of the cloud concept, we've already defined cloud in the first class. We've looked at what cloud computing is all about. Cloud is the delivery of computing service over the internet. Examples: servers, database, networking, softwares, and we've looked at the responsibility that goes with cloud computing. We say it's a shared responsibility. You will see in this slide, I decided to put a video of a data center. So this data center can be an example of an availability zone for Azure. Remember, we said an availability zone consists of 2 or more data centers in the same region, right? So cloud computing is just the technology of giving somebody else or using someone else's infrastructure to host your application. Or if the person can package an application that you require for your work and deliver it to you. In that case, it's called a PaaS. If you are just going to be using the infrastructure and you want to manage the infrastructure yourself, that is called an IaaS. That's IA, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. PaaS is Platform as a Service. Those are concepts around cloud computing models, So the cloud computing model also includes public, private, and hybrid. Public is the one that anybody with an account can create. Many of us have created that already. I asked us to go to portal.azure.com to create an account using your email. We're going to take a more structured class around identity and management. I will explain some bits of identity and management. That is a class we'll take, just for us to understand how identity is managed in Azure. We also have private cloud. Some companies have private cloud. Governments have private cloud. Like the US government, they use a portion of Azure called Azure Government. The UK government also uses it. Like all the HMRC, all the government websites are in the cloud. So we have a hybrid. Some companies can choose to have a portion of their infrastructure on private cloud and some other portion on public. In that case, it's called hybrid. We talked about the model of cloud, which is OPEX, that's operation expense, and the CAPEX, the capital expenditure. Those are the models around cloud computing. But for you as an end user, or for a company as an end user, it's more of an OPEX they focus on, because it's an ongoing pay-as-you-go subscription or usage that that applies. For example, you spin up a VM in the cloud. Like last week, I think we started to set up a VM. If between last week and this week, we had completed that process of spinning up that VM, it would have incurred some charges, So the charges, and usually you settle it on your card that you have used to set up your account. So I advise that if you are doing any of your practicals, like EMC has asked, when you spin up any resource, it's best you delete it. If you don't delete it, you are going to be charged at the end of the month for whatever you have used in the cloud. So be mindful of that, your consumption. There's also what we call serverless computing. It's the cloud technology has made that much more possible. Serverless computing is also called containers. There's something called containers. In the second class, I was trying to explain virtualization. And I said virtualization is a process of, virtualizing the hardware of a computing resource. Computing resource in terms of the CPU, the RAM, the memory, so for your local machine, for example, your laptop, you can get an hypervisor that you can install on your laptop, and then that hypervisor will help you to install virtual machines on your laptop. But in the case of hypervisor virtual machine virtualization technology, it's the hardware that is being what's the word now? Virtualized. The hardware resource is shared amongst all the VMs. So the VMs would have access to the hardware resource that your machine consists of. And each of those VMs would also have their operating system. Normally, if you are trying to configure a server, you need an operating system, you need variables or services that needs to be configured on that machine for the server to work. But we also have a new type of virtualization called containerization. That is what is called serverless, containerization computing, where you orchestrate lightweight containers. When I say container, I'm trying to refer to a virtualized setup where the operating system of the hardware is now what provides the platform to host an application, to host every resource that application needs in a separate box called a container. So unlike a virtual machine, in which you need to have specific operating system on that virtual machine, for containers, you can have applications separated within a container, and then each of them can run independent of the others. So that is serverless computing. I will get to all the practical aspects. So example, you might have come across example of containers are Docker containers that are used. Container technology started off with Linux platform, but Microsoft also have their own Windows variant of containers. So please, if you need me to stop, you can just raise your hand. I can stop. I also want to talk about the benefits of using cloud. We've talked about this in our first two classes. You need to be able to describe that. Yeah, the benefits in terms of availability. The SLA around cloud computing is usually minimum of 99. The fractional value now can differ. Some service will give you 99.99, some 99.98 or 99.97. That's in terms of availability. And what is availability? At the time you need your resource, it is available for you. It's just like www.google.com. There is no time you go to www.google.com or www.bing.com that it's not available. That is, cloud computing for you. And then scalability, if I deploy one server for my application and the demand for my application grows, for example, I decided to launch a marketplace for Nigerians in the UK, and virtually everybody, including the Nigerians outside the UK, started patronizing my marketplace. If I have that application deployed in the cloud, I can easily scale. That is also part of the advantage of containers. In fact, it is done in such a way that if I orchestrate it with Kubernetes, it can scale automatically. You can do auto scaling. It will just increase the resource as the demand increases. So that is scalability. So in terms of benefits, and then the benefits of security and governance all around cloud are part of the knowledge you need to have. If you pick each of these concepts and just use your Bing search, I want to advise that you can leverage on AI to speed up your knowledge. If you really have a deadline, you can use AI to speed up your knowledge. Just get each of these concepts, type them in Bing, and it will produce more content for you to read around, and you can get to prepare for your exams better. I think I've talked about infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service provides virtualized computing resources over the internet. Example of of an infrastructure as a service is if in Azure, for example, I deploy my virtual machine. If I deploy that virtual machine, let's say I deploy 10 virtual machines and I installed I have 4 servers. I have 6 users on that virtual machine. I will have to be in control. I will have to manage those machines myself. I will have to configure their network. I will have to ensure they are patched, because that's an infrastructure as a service offering that I'm leveraging on. Infrastructure means the bone or the skeleton that is required to run a service. So if I have a virtual machine that I want to use, I want to configure a database server, for example, on that virtual machine. If I'm running the infrastructure as a service model, I will have to install that database on that machine. I will have to ensure that it is secured. Remember, we talked about shared responsibility. I will have to ensure that it is properly patched. The operating system is properly patched. When we talk about patching is in terms of vulnerability. Now, every operating system or application that is released has to continually be upgraded and worked and improved on in terms of security, because when you're releasing a product, you might not have a complete overview of the security loophole that might exist on the application. And that is what we call vulnerability, because we always have bad actors out there that want to exploit the vulnerability of your operating system or the vulnerability of your application. So usually, I'm sure you have experienced it before, you will notice that your IT team members will say, oh, we're doing an upgrade, we're doing a security patching. Security patching means any vulnerability that has been identified, a solution will be released to mitigate that vulnerability. And so for that solution to be applied, an update has to be run on the machine. That is what we call patching. So if I'm...
Sorry to cut you. Yemisi is asking if patching part of firewall.
Okay, so patching being part of firewall. No, firewall is a device that you put on your network as a first line of defense, right? It's like the in terms of security now, physical security, the firewall itself, if it's a physical firewall in terms of a hardware, because firewall has software firewall. For example, in the cloud, when we come to network configuration, we're going to look deep into all of that. But when you're configuring your network, you need to, your firewall must be like the gatekeeper. There's what we call an IDS, that's intrusion detection system, right? The firewall must have that IDS feature on it to identify any form of intrusion into your network. However, the firewall operating system itself might also require upgrade and patching as time goes on, because, or maybe update of its vulnerability database, because it will have a database, that it compares any form of intrusion attack with, and then it mitigates. You understand? So firewall, in those times when companies deploy in data center, there is a physical hardware that is called a firewall blade that is used on the network. But in the cloud now, Microsoft have their own, they call it Azure Firewall. So all you do is you spin it up and then you configure it. So what the firewall does is that it scans ports. There are ports that you will tell the firewall that you don't want so and so service to run on this port, and so you block it. So the firewall will block those services, from coming into your network. You can decide to block it in either direction, either when it is coming into your network or when it is going out from your network out into the internet. Remember that at the beginning of the class, I talked about the different types of network. I mentioned LAN, I mentioned WAN, and then I mentioned the internet. So the internet is just interconnectivity of different computers. So if you are setting up your own network, I've been thinking that maybe for this class, we should set up our own network, right? So that we can use it as part of our practice. Maybe later on, I will ask for our full details of our name and first name and second name. We'll set up a directory system for each one of us, just to replicate a typical company setup, right? So we can do that, so that we do all the testing, and then we delete the resource, or we keep it if we choose to pay as a group. If we want to pay for the service, if we want to keep it, we can now decide. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Did I answer your question? You can unmute yourself. Okay, so so that is for IaaS. I was trying to explain IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And then platform as a service is a situation where the cloud provider has prepared a complete box of a solution. Let's say, for example, there's what we call Azure Virtual Desktop, AVD, right? It is actually a virtual machine that Azure is managing, and they've configured everything on that virtual machine. They've installed Office, they've installed any form of application that you want. You define it at the time of the creation, and then they present it to you as a pass, right? That's platform as a service. Let me see how to explain it again. It's a platform that developers can easily use to build, test, and deploy the applications very fast. Example of that in Azure is Azure Apps Service Plans. Azure App Service Plans are all PaaS. When I say Azure App Service Plan, I will show us some of those resources when we log into the portal. When you want to deploy an application, you need a server. If you are running it on your physical on-premises, on-prem, or in your physical data center, you need to buy a physical machine, install your operating system, install all the dependencies, on the operating system. When I say dependencies, there are other background services that application might require. You need to configure it. Maybe you need to configure which port needs to be open, which port needs to be closed, and then you also install the security software that needs to protect that application on that server. Now, for a pass, that entire box has been done for you. All they're asking you for is just to spin up the resource and begin to use, right? So that is platform as a service. So Azure App Service Plan, you find that if you can just spin up an app service plan, it will have a core CPU, it will have the runtime that is required to run your application. When I say runtime is the environmental settings that your application depends on. For example, an application can be a .NET application. When I say .NET is the framework that Microsoft provides to build application, right? So if you are building an application on .NET, you need to use C#. So C# is Microsoft's native programming language. But if I'm building an application on Java is run by Oracle. The runtime for Java, I need a Java virtual machine, JVM, to be on that server for my application to work. So those are runtimes. It's like to bring it down to layman terms. So if a surgeon wants to operate, if let's say an orthopedic surgeon wants to operate, the instruments that the orthopedic surgeon will require for bone surgery are different from the instruments that a gynecologist will use to deliver a woman who needs to undergo C-section. Both of them are surgeons, right? But what they use, the runtime. So if you go into the theater, and they both have their patients, they cannot operate in the same theater. Every doctor would have to have their own setting to do the operation that they need to. So that setting is called runtime for a server. I think I've tried to break it down. So software as a service is also when a pass has been built. For example, a software has been built on a pass or on an IaaS, and then it's presented to you as a service. So that's software as a service. Example of software as a service, we have Office 365. In those days, before you can use Office, you have to install Office locally on your machine, right? But later on, Microsoft went, as the cloud computing improved, they went into SaaS provision for Office. So that's SaaS. It's good that you understand these differences because it's a very common interview questions to differentiate the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So I would like you to also be able to give examples, please, for anyone who has the opportunity to be interviewed for any job. And then in the last 2 weeks, we talked about Azure region. We talked about region pairs. We've talked about availability zones, this data center for Azure, and I've explained Azure resource as Azure resource group. Just to, as a recap again, these are the fundamentals. You must be able to understand it. Please just put it. You need it. You need to have these concepts, particularly the regions, the resources, resource groups. Availability zone is not in all. It's not all the resources in Azure that you require availability zones for. But when you are spinning up that resource, there will be a tab that will ask you to choose the availability zone. The availability zone is more for redundancy, right? Redundancy in terms of, okay, to avoid failure. For example, remember I talked about IaaS, Azure, virtual machine. Virtual machine falls under the category of resources that you can deploy availability zones for, just for redundancy. What is an availability zone? An availability zone is a how do I put it? What word do I use now? When you have 2 or more data centers clustered in the same region, you have one availability zone. So typically one region will usually have 3 availability zones. So for example, in the UK here, we've got 2 regions in the UK. We have the UK West and the UK South, right? Each of these regions will have their availability zones, 3 availability zones. What that means is that we have physical data centers, like what you are seeing on the screen, that are clustered together to form one zone. And then if you cluster more of them again, you form the second zone. So 3 like that are usually in a region. And remember that it's also data centers that we mean here. So for resource groups, when you group, you actually have to create resources and put them together into resource groups. One for governance sake, for management purposes. For example, remember that last week I also talked about subscription and management groups, right? So management group is the highest level of management, of ownership in the Azure. So the account owner, right, has access at the level of the management group, right? But you can create as many management groups as you want. The resources can be arranged into different management groups, which will also have subscriptions. And then under the subscription, we have the resource groups. So the resources are, arranged into resource groups, subscriptions, and management groups. So that is the hierarchy of how to define where or what will be used for any purpose. So because you can have production environment, developer environment. Your developers, for example, might just want to have their own subscription. So you call that subscription or dev subscription. And then that dev subscription can come under a management group, and that management group can have an admin that is in charge. Maybe the dev lead is in charge of that management group. That means access in terms of RBAC features, role-based access control. RBAC is called role-based access control. Now, access in cloud or in computing usually follow the rule of role-based access control. What that means is that for you to have access to any resource, it must be defined by the role that you are playing in the environment or in the estate, right? So if you're an admin, that is a role. An admin is a role. If you are a developer is a role. If you are a data engineer is a role, right? But a data engineer, the resources that a data engineer will need will be different from the resources that a developer will need. Are we following? A developer might require access to app service plan, access to Redis cache, might require access to MongoDB, might require access to Azure SQL database, or Azure Synapse in some cases, or Azure Search, right? But a, a data engineer will require access to Azure Data Factory, Azure maybe SQL, or anything relating to data. So the role that each of these individuals play will determine the type of access that the overall admin of the subscription will provide. And normally, role-based access control is defined at groups. You cluster your users into groups, right? Not just individually. You put the access control or the RBAC feature on the group, and you do that with at the Active Directory level. Just a point of note: Azure Active Directory is the user is a system in Azure that is used to manage both users and resources within the Azure, right? But Azure Active Directory is now known as Entra. I want us to take note of that. It's now known as Entra. The name was changed in October. Now, Azure Active Directory is actually an extension of the native Active Directory that was used on on-prem servers in those days, right? When I mean by on-prem servers, what I mean by Active Directory is that in your typical, the way Microsoft designed their technology, they designed it around the Active Directory framework. What that means is that both users and resources, if I say resources, computers, for example, must belong to groups, and then that group must belong to domain, and then that domain can now also belong to a tree. So see it like a pyramid, where from the top you have a tree, or a forest rather, and then from that forest you can have several domains or one domain, right? And then from that domain you have groups. From that groups you have computers. From that computer you now have users that are using those computers. That is the typical way that Microsoft infrastructure is designed. When I say domain, www.google.com is a domain, right? www.afolabicompanies.com is a domain. www.ubagroup.com is a domain. If you are defining a domain, or if you are designing your Active Directory, I've digressed a little. I'm just giving general knowledge so that as you are reading these things up on your own, it will make sense, right? And then you can easily come back with your questions. If you are designing your Active Directory, you define the domain under the forest name. Usually you have a forest name, then you need to have a forest domain. Now there are servers that manage the domain. They are called the domain controller. You might have heard that before. Domain controller is the machine or the server that manages the domain. It's like the final authority of what every other person has access to in the organization. I will want to stop there for that. That is a separate topic which I can pick up with us later, but I need to lay that background so that we can understand where Azure Active Directory, the role that Azure Active Directory is also playing, because Azure Active Directory is now the cloud version of the foundational Active Directory that everybody knew about. If you know, for those who have been in the IT industry for a while, you know that you need an Active Directory setting. Normally, for you would have heard your IT staff saying the ATM has disjoined from the domain. I need to rejoin it back to the domain, or the machine is no longer in the domain. What that means that the machine has lost connectivity to the overall boss in that organization. That is the domain controller, right? So because the domain controller decides the resources, decides, of course, is able to know by the computer name every resource and user that is in that organization. And you need to be joined to the domain to have access to some resources. The configuration of all of that is done by the domain administrator. So that is that. The other aspect is also the Azure Compute and networking services. When I say compute, just know that what I'm saying is around the CPU, the RAM, the hardware, right? Can we mute? Ikechi, can you help me mute that person?
Oh, this person is matching me. This person is touching me.
Who is that?
Sorry, Ralph, I don't have any access. So
you don't? Okay. All right, I've muted the person. Thank you. All right. So I'll just continue. So yeah, compute in terms, when I say compute, what I'm saying is the resources that are required to carry out any computational work. So example, virtual machine, your containers. I've talked about containers, and Azure Function. Azure Function is a resource. It's also part of a Azure PaaS service. You use it together with Azure App Service Plans. That's where normally you deploy your code. You deploy your code in Azure Functions. I will explain all of that with time. I don't want to bog us with too much details. Then we also have all the options of the virtual machine. There is Azure Virtual Desktop, machine scale sets, availability sets. When you're deploying databases, for example, you need to deploy them as availability sets. What that means is that if it's going to be for production use, you must have 3 availability sets for your SQL database, so that your users, when they are connecting, if one database is overloaded or is handling too many requests, it can easily fall back to the second and third one, and they are mirrors of themselves. So those databases are mirrors of themselves. They have the same data. They replicate. There will be a master database that will replicate on the other 2. But when the users want to get information from the database, or when the application, right, wants to retrieve information from the database, it can go to anyone. Though you can easily define and say, pick on the first server first before going to the second. So that is availability set. So you also must be able to describe virtual machines, application hosting options. I want to talk about the networking. Now, remember I talked about LAN being the base network when it comes to traditional networks setup.
Sorry, somebody is asking, I think it's Yemisi, what's the difference between a VM and a container?
Okay. The difference now, a VM, right, is a virtualized, is a machine that is virtual. They are both virtualized machines, but one is virtualized at the level of the hardware, while the other one is virtualized at the level of the operating system. This is what I mean. If I deploy a virtual machine, right, on my system, for example, you can try it out. You can, maybe in the next class, we can do that practical. If I deploy a virtual machine on my system, that virtual machine will share the resources of my CPU, that means the speed of my processor, and the RAM, and also the hardware. It will also have its own operating system. You understand? That is a virtual machine. However, for a container, all that the container needs is just the operating system. When I say the operating system, I mean Windows environment or Linux environment. And what it is, so it's more independent at just the level of the operating system, right? And you can have, it does not need to have its own operating system to run, but a virtual machine needs its own operating system to run. So what the virtual machine shares is the hardware, but the container operates at the level of the operating system. It doesn't need to have its own operating system. All it needs to have is a runtime environment that you have configured, and that application can run in that small box of a container. I don't know if I've explained it. So these are just, is it clear?
No, please. Please, no.
Okay, virtual machine. And let me, okay, I'll explain it again. Now, you know what virtualization is? Virtualization is when it's logical deployment, logical orchestration. Okay, look at this data center in the background. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 rows of different racks, right? Assuming that each of these rack is a server that has CPU, RAM, and hardware on it. For me to interact with that machine, I need an operating system. So if I install an operating system on that, let's say the first one, I have my machine. I can use it. I can deploy it as a server. Now, on that machine, if I want to use that machine as a database server, I can, because it's just one operating system that is on it, I can only use that machine as a database server. The second rack, right, I can decide to say this will be a DNS server. The next one, the third one, I can decide to say this will be a mail server. Now, if I want to now go into virtualization, I can decide and say that first machine, because it has maybe, for example, 100 gigabits of RAM, that is a lot of memory. There is a technology of virtualization that was introduced by a company called VMware. They were the leaders in that, VMware. You know, rather than buying separate racks in the data center, just like we have in this video, you can just, you know, pick one of those machines and install another 20 virtual machines on it. But each of those 20 virtual machines will have to share the RAM space, that's virtual memory now, the hardware space, and the CPU resources directly. They will have to have access to it directly for them to operate, because each of them would have their own operating system, even though they are virtualized machines. Do you understand? But when it comes to container is another improvement to the virtualization technology. Remember that I told you that technology just keeps improving like fashion. This year now, the fashion companies will start thinking of producing new designs. So that's how technology is. Virtualization, container virtualization is a step above the virtual machine virtualization that we know. And the difference is that rather than virtualizing the hardware, sharing the resources of the hardware, all that the container requires is just the operating system. And then each container can have its own runtime within that operating system. So it means that on an operating system, I can now have several containers, maybe 5, 10, 20 containers, right? Because they are lightweight. They do not depend on so much memory demand. They do not have so much of memory demand. And the way it's configured, it's actually software based, so to say. That's why it's a container. So it's more of like packaging what, you know, what is required to run an application within a small environment, and then you deploy it as container. So if I want to run my database, I can just, you know, all that I need to run a database, I can put them together in a file, deploy a container file, and then that small container will be running as a database. I can now have another container running as a mail server container. I can have another third one running as any other server container. Now, if you may now ask and say, okay, does it mean that I can install container on a virtual machine? That is now correct. So if you have a virtual machine, for example, you can now also install a container on a virtual machine. So you now have two levels of virtualization. You have virtualized the hardware, which is the physical rack you are seeing here, you know, into a virtual machine. Then each of the virtual machine can now have maybe 10 containers. So the demand for online or internet-based solution, that SaaS solution, has had to bring about these developments in technology. You understand? Is it clear now? Frankly, when I was reading it too, or when the technology came out and I had to also learn about it, it took me a while to understand the difference. See it that way. That word container actually means container. If you go to the port, right? Every container is separate. Every container has unique items inside it, except maybe for a Papa container where people can lump in different things when they're shipping in their items. But the container is supposed to be having unique stuff inside it, so that when you open it, you only find one particular thing inside it, right? So that word container actually means container. So it means that if I want to deploy maybe a Java runtime environment application, I will just define the environment, the parameters, and then deploy it. Yeah, I just
Ralph, can I try?
try, Ikechi. Maybe you can help me.
Understand it. Maybe I'll use another example.
Okay,
Is everybody fine?
Go on, please. Go on.
Okay, so imagine the VMware. It's like where you have. Okay, so I think everybody will fairly understand it. VMware is like you divide your hard drive into two somehow, and then you are logging into different parts of it. So let's assume for the people who probably would get this more are people who have a Mac, and then you need to run something like Power BI, which doesn't have a Mac version.
Hot.
So you then go and install. There's something called boot application. So it means on your system you divide the hard drive into two. One part is for Windows, one part is for Mac. That's like virtualization. Then containerization is like, imagine you have different folders on your desktop. Each folder you open has something unique inside. So if you're not saving the same information on the same, say you have 4 folders, and every time maybe you want to save something, either saving on your desktop, or is in your downloads, or is in your document. Containers are like those folders. Each one can run within itself, and then you don't need to have a different computer to open a folder. So long as that folder is created, that folder can run within itself inside and not affect what is happening outside the folder. I don't know if that helps. Okay. Ralph, over to you. I think Yemi says better, so we can move on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ikechi, for breaking it down further. If you need any further clarification, you can call me after the class or during the week. We can have a chat about it. I can show you. And I think maybe we should have a practical around this. And I think I would like to do that, to just demonstrate some of these concepts, so that each one of us can install virtual machines on our laptop. And then you also install a container on your laptop and you see the difference, right? So yeah, so I was trying to explain the network aspect. Please, is container safer? No, there's not. It's they all have different use cases, right? There are some infrastructure or architecture design that is VM based design. I think the practical aspect will help. Yeah, yeah. And then there are also, it's all about architecture. When we say architecture, for every company, for every organization or application that is deployed, how you want it deployed, you need to start from your architect, the architect design, the architectural design, the foundation. So whether it's container or VMware, you have to secure all of them together. You have to, you have to handle the security, because the fact that you're using containers does not mean you compromise security, right? So managing containers is done is done with Kubernetes. You might have heard about Kubernetes. In Azure, it's called. Usually, you have a cluster manager that manages the containers. It's a bit advanced, but yeah. All right. So I was trying to explain networking, and I said LAN. Okay, you're welcome, Yemisi. Your questions are very good. Please keep it up. So networking, the foundation of network, LAN one, and then we go to the internet. I don't want to go to the old type of network categories again. But in Azure, the baseline network that you need to create starts with your virtual network. It's called VNet, virtual network. And then within that virtual network, you need to break it. You can break it down into subnets, right? Subnets. I will take a whole class around IP addressing, around this network. It's a whole different, because you can choose to be an Azure network engineer if people are earning thousands of pounds with that, just that role, networking, right? But because we are starting from foundation, you need like a general knowledge about everything. As you move on, if you feel that you are more comfortable with networking, you specialize just on networking, and frankly, you're in great demand, network engineers, So in network design, there is what we call pairing of two VNets, right? There is what we call network topology. Network topology can be a mesh technology topology or a star topology. These are all network concepts, right? I will break all of them down later. Then we also have Azure DNS. Azure DNS is Azure Domain Name Service, right? I think I've explained domain name service in this class. Then we also have VPN gateway. VPN is one of the early technologies of tunneling. Tunneling is a technology where even though you are using the internet, you have a private lane or a private road on the internet that connects your users, or that your users can use to access your resources, right? So though they can be on the internet, for them to access your resource, they need to put on their VPN. That VPN will provide a tunneling session in the internet traffic for isolation, and that will help to prevent snooping of data, man-in-the-middle types of attacks that happens in the security space. So, but to deploy that, you in a network setting, you need a VPN gateway. That is a resource. So these things I'm mentioning are examples of Azure resource. Then we also have Azure Express Route. We have Azure Public and Private Endpoint. These are all resources that are used for the network in Azure. What you need for the AZ900 are just basic knowledge. You don't need too much of in-depth knowledge. As you pass the AZ900 and you want to go deeper, then you begin to specialize, right? You begin to specialize. That was why I brought up the first slide where I showed different track that you can decide to go through. Sorry, I messed up my. Where is my? Oh God, where is my slide? Okay. Apologies. I've talked about storage before. Storage services. Storage services are the services that are required to store data. And when we're talking about storage service, we're talking about storage accounts. We're talking about my big data, Azure Synapse, the redundancy that comes. When we say redundancy has to do with it's part of the function of availability. Redundancy in the sense that when you want your data available to you, you cannot just deploy one resource and say your data is redundant or your resource is redundant. You need to have replicas of your data. So and that also comes in tiers, storage tiers. When we say storage tiers, it means that if your storage is in one region, depending on the tier is just about money, how much you be able to pay based on the level of service that you need to be provided. That is a storage tier, right? And the redundancy can also be a region redundant. It means that if you are storing your data in UK South, for example, and you want to create redundancy, you can have another Azure, or Microsoft can create a redundancy of that same data for you in another region. But your storage tier will have to match that service that you are requiring, and it will also come at a cost. So these are all features around storage: file storage, heavy data storage, metadata storage, application data storage, database storage. These are all the storage services. Then I think I've talked a bit about identity, access, and security. I did mention earlier that Azure Active Directory, is now known. It used to be called Azure AD. It's now known as Microsoft Entra. I think I've explained that. I won't want to go over that again. But we also have some services within Azure, within the Entra service, that has to do with single sign-on. Single sign-on means with one username and password, you want to have access to different applications in your environment. That is single sign-on. And we also have multi-factor authentication. A lot of us are aware about this. For those who have worked in the bank, you know that 2FA is something that people have to we're required to set up at a point. What it means is somebody has authenticated, but you need to verify. Are you the same person that authenticated? That is second level authentication. That's multi-factor. It's multi-factor because you can authenticate with more than one channel. It can be SMS, it can be code, it can be anything. There is also a new technology of passwordless now that can be configured in Azure. External identities around business to business for companies that have contractors that come into their environment. You can set up external identity system for them. Conditional access control, yeah, that's part of what you need for the external identities or for even internal users. You don't want them to have access to certain resources. You set up conditional access within AD. I've talked about Azure rollback access control, zero trust. I can't remember what zero trust is, but they are all part of security features, more in-depth knowledge around security. Zero trust. Defense in depth talks more about how deep your defense is in terms of what level do users need to get to before they can have access to a resource within your environment. That is defense in depth. You usually start from the outdoor, from the outer court or the outer layer of your security. And when we're talking about the outer layer of your security, do you have antivirus? Do you have users, can they just carelessly use USB on their environment? That is the outer layer. If you come into the environment, let's say you log into the domain, how many applications can people have access to? So defense has to keep graduating and increasing as the sensitivity of the data also increases. So that is what defense in depth is all about. Microsoft Defender is a major technology to learn if you are going to go into security, because Microsoft have improved over the years in designing this product. It can act as antivirus for you. A lot of security configurations are done with the Microsoft Defender. Then for those who do not really want to go into too much of technical details with all this cloud stuff, you can just stop at the cost management level, right? And look at how costs is managed, by those who have been given to the right to deploy resource. In the last company I worked for, there was a time that our bill in the cloud was running to about £48,000 every month. And the management had to come up and say they want us to see how to bring down this cost. Remember, I talked about OPEX, which is an operational cost that companies will always need to put an eye on, So cost management is very critical. There are resources that Azure have provided, like the Azure Advisor is a software that can help whoever is in charge of managing this to understand where the cost is going. You can set up your budget, you can set up your alerts, and it can also provide recommendations. Then I think last week I did talk about tags. Sometimes apart from using tags to identify who owns what, you also use tags to track your costs, to track which resource is consuming more money for you. So that's that. Sorry, I have a co-instructor here. Yeah, so
sorry, I didn't hear your last statement. He said we also use what to track cost?
Tags.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, tags. The purpose of tags. Tags are also used to track cost. Normally, when you're deploying a resource, part of the tag you can define is also the owner tag. Normally, if you are trying to deploy a resource, you can check it up, or you can try to deploy. I will do an example. You see to ask you who is the owner. That's where usually you define the name. And in terms of governance, there are policies that needs to be defined, around which tag can be used, for any resource deployment. You just don't put any type of tag, right? That will have to be defined at governance level. In terms of policy. And the policy will also be applied at the management group level. Usually, you apply your policies at the management group level. Policy is a complete, work that can take months for any organization that is trying to get into the cloud, or any organization or company that has had very poor governance of their cloud resource in the past. Maybe they are having problems of profitability in the establishment, and they want to see how to improve their profitability. You can begin to audit them by starting from this level. So for anybody who has experience in financial accounting and all of that, this is a good experience to pick up here. Yeah, I think I've talked about policy. Azure Policy is a service in Azure that allows you to create, assign, and manage policies that enforce compliance with your organizational standards and best practices. The Microsoft Purview, it's also around data governance, helps you to discover, to classify, and manage your data across your organization. These are all resources. These things I'm mentioning are all resources. You can also do resource lock. You can lock a resource to prevent accidental deletion or to prevent any form of modification. You do that in your production environment, right? So that you just don't wake up and everything is gone within the cloud. All right. Then we also have other tools that we can use to manage resources within Azure. The one I logged on to last week is Azure Portal. Azure Portal. But we also have Azure Cloud Shell. Somebody in the group has asked questions around Azure Cloud Shell before. I will show us Azure Cloud Shell later when we log in. Then we also have Azure Command Line. You can remember that last week I also talked about Shell. Shell, right? Yeah. Sorry, it's my third last one. I talked about Shell. The entire cloud infrastructure also has the command line control that you can use to manage it. And that's where your AZ command comes into play. So we have the Azure PowerShell. You use AZ commands in Azure PowerShell. And then the CLI is like Azure Bash, right? That you use. The CLI and the Cloud Shell, the same command goes along there. Then Azure Arc is a tool that for those who want to operate hybrid configuration, they need an Azure Arc. Those who want to, the companies that want to operate hybrid cloud management, they need a resource called Azure Arc. What that Azure Arc does is it will help to replicate whatever they have on-prem in the cloud and provide a seamless connectivity of those resources. Or maybe you want to set up a multi-cloud configuration. When I mean multi-cloud, means maybe a company is using Azure, but they also want to deploy some resources in Oracle, OCI, or they want to deploy some resources in GCP, that's Google Cloud Platform. So they will need an Azure Arc for that. Then infrastructure as code. Now, remember that I was speaking about this data center in the background, the video of this data center in the background. You can see physical servers, right? Right now, because of the advent of cloud solution, infrastructure now has actually been brought to the level of code. What I mean by that is that you can now deploy your resources using code. Example of infrastructure as code is your Terraform, is your, somebody mentioned AWS Cloud Formations, I think, last week. Then for Azure, what we have is Bicep and ARM templates. ARM template. I'm going to take, it's a whole journey of 12 months. My prayer is that before 12 months, some of us start getting job. As you get your hands dirty in the game, you come and become resource within the class. But these are all, it's going to be a very exciting time together. We're all going to learn together here. For infrastructure as code, there is a software called Terraform that is very popular in the industry. Is used. It's popular because you can use it to deploy for multi-cloud. So if you learn Terraform, you can be able to deploy Terraform for AWS, Terraform for GCP, Terraform for OCI, Terraform for Azure. It's more unique. But each of those cloud providers have their own unique IAC software or IAC templates. For Azure, it's called ARM template, Azure Resource Manager template, or Bicep. Bicep is a more recent one, right? But people still use ARM template. For GCP, I can't remember what theirs is, but I know that GCP, when I was learning GCP, I used more of Terraform. For AWS, I think it's CloudFormation. Oracle also have their own, but they use more of Terraform too for Oracle. So that's infrastructure as code. So for those who are running away from coding, frankly, in this present day and age, you can't run away from coding. You can just learn what you need to do the work that you need to do, right? And it's not like it's difficult. Coding, it's over the years, as it's not like it's difficult. Coding to design an application is different from coding to troubleshoot or coding to write a script, right? Yeah, we are still learning. I'm still learning, and I just want us to have open mind towards these things, right? So that's infrastructure as code. Now there is also the monitoring aspect of your Azure resources. I've spoken about Azure Advisor before. Helps you to optimize your deployments. It helps you to manage your costs. It helps you to check your performance of your resource. If you're having performance issue, you can easily go to the Azure Manager, Azure Advisor, set some dates, set some parameters, and it will bring up for you a dashboard, and you'll be able to see, interpret the data and find out where your problems are. Then there is also the main Azure Service Health. Because in the background, these resources are deployed from a data center. If, let's say, a data center has maybe one of these rack in the background, right, has cooling problem. Maybe the cooling fan is not working properly. The CPU will start freezing up. That's the physical hardware. And that will also affect the end cloud user. And that can be picked up from the Azure Service Health. You can use that to argue your case in terms of your SLA with your cloud provider and say, between so and so time, we experience this downtime. This is the report that I generated. So some of us who might be recruited as IT auditors, you can use this, to make your case. Then we also have Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is used for individual resources, right? We have the Log Analytics. Log Analytics is a resource that is used to store all the log information of the resources that have been deployed, because those resources will be releasing metadata. What I mean by metadata are fractional data. Fractional data is called metadata. Fractional data in terms of uptime this, per second performance, when did a user sign in, what did the user do, things like that are all metadata information, and you need a resource to store that data. Normally, the Log Analytics workspace is you usually be charged some fractional amounts of money every month to store that data. We also have alerts that can be configured, and we also have a very important application resource called Application Insight. If you deploy an application in the app service plan, you need to also configure the Application Insights to give you alerts on how the application is performing in terms of the protocol, any error that is happening, You know, usually if an application is down, you look out for errors. What are the types of errors? Like for HTTP errors, error 500 is one. Error 400, you watch out for that type of error. Error 401, 402, all those kind of errors, you know, are errors that an application insight resource will give you for your application. It helps you to manage or to see how your application is performing, or how the experience that the end user is having with the application overall. And if if there is outage, it will also give you timing of when the outage occurred. That will help those who are in support. So this is just a little complete dashboard description of all that I've been explaining. The data resource are here. We have SQL database here. We have SQL data warehouse. We have Cosmo DB. We have SQL something database. There are different types of data resource. There is Azure Redis Cache. Redis Cache is a solution that developers use for persistency of their data. When I say persistency, it means it helps to avoid truncation of communication with the back end services, you know, from the front end. It helps. It's a memory resource that you deploy that cache. Cache means it keeps the information in a state that will be available for a longer time, even as it is being retrieved from the back end, right? We also have table storage. We also have a very important resource now that is used for AI service. It's called Azure Search, right? The intelligence aspect, this is more for AI. We have the cognitive service. This is a whole bunch. Inside this cognitive service, you have like 8 more services. And we also have bot services here. For those who want to go into machine learning, we have the Azure ML Studio. This is it. For those who want to do data analytics, we have the Azure HD Insights, Azure Stream Analytics, Data Lake Storage, Data Lake Analytics. If you are going to be doing data engineering, you need to have information about how, you know, these services work. We have Data Factory, we have the Power BI, right? So the data engineer I will bring, this is his own domain. He works here, he works with data. So you deal with data and analytics, IoT. We also have IoT, Internet of Things. IoT is also related to machine learning because it's a technology where you control devices via the internet. They can be project-based devices, sensor-based devices. Maybe you have a fridge that connects to the internet. That is an IoT device. The chip can be communicating through Azure to the server wherever it is stored, you know. And then we also have developer service. That's here we have Visual Studio. Visual Studio is the IDE. When I say IDE means integrated development environment that is used to develop .NET applications. Remember I mentioned .NET application, but not just .NET. It used to just be .NET. Right now you can use Visual Studio to deploy as many types of applications you want, including Java, right? It's more open source now. And I think I've asked some of us to download VS Code. There's a difference between Visual Studio and VS Code. Visual Studio is the old one. VS Code is the more recent, is a lightweight version of Visual Studio. We have here Azure DevOps for those who might be interested in DevOps engineering role. I used to use this. We're going to use this for deployments and pipelines. That's CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. I've talked about application insights. Yes, Then compute service, VMware, the dev test lab, container services. We have the application platform, web apps. We have cloud service here. Yeah, functions, service hubs. Then we also have the integration service bots. So many times, don't get yourself bogged with knowing how all of this, it's not even possible. I that is speaking with you, I don't know how some of these function, these resources work. Just know what you need for the role that you want to take within Azure. Does it make sense? This AZ 900 exam you're trying to write, it's more of a foundational knowledge, like a general knowledge kind of thing. As you advance into it, you can now choose a track and say, okay, I want to just do data. I just want to do administrator. I want to know how to administer Azure resources. I just want to know how to deploy applications. So you can choose to go the DevOps route, Azure DevOps, and know Azure DevOps very well, right? Or you can choose and say, I want to do AI, right? So, right. Okay. I would like to give room for some questions. Any question?
Yeah, for curiosity's sake, when you were lecturing, you mentioned the company you worked for the last time that you were trying to beat down the cost. I just wanted to find out whether you were successful. What I mean, the company, were they successful in bringing down? What was the cost? What was the reason for the high cost?
Now, at the time I joined the company, there was a project of tidying up the resource. There are some of these companies that had very poor governance system in place when they moved into the cloud, right? When I mean governance system means everybody that just had access to the cloud was just spinning up resources. It was a software company because they had a software that other companies were using. And usually when people are testing, for example, in the dev subscription, I could just spin up a resource because of some test I want to do. And when I'm done with the resource, I might not turn it off or it's just running, right? There are some resources that were spawned up by people who had left the company, So when we came, we had to sit down to itemize and find out what is this resource being used for and is it needed. At the time I was doing that project, I was able to save the company about £5,000 based on what I identified. For example, in their app service plan alone, I found out that some of the tiers, when I mean tier, T-I-E-R, remember that I've said that tier is a categorization of the level of the resource that you need within Azure, right? You start from the lowest tier normally, tier F free, S standard, 0, 1, 0, S0, S1, S2, like that. That's how it grows. So I found out that there were app service plans that were running on higher tiers, and the resource that was using it didn't require that much of a high tier. So before I left the place, I'd been able to save them about £5,000 every month, right? So yeah. But unfortunately, the company even folded up because I think, so yeah, they went into administration later. Somebody, I think I saw a question in the chat. Please, can you explain again the VPN gateway? I hope it's not the same as VPN, right? All right, so I'll answer the first question. You see, when you're trying to deploy a VPN, usually you need a VPN gateway. Do you understand? So the VPN is the service, but for the user, if you configure your VPN gateway, you will now need to download the client, VPN client, which you will ask each of your users to install on their machine. The VPN client is just a small, lightweight software that they have to install and click on to access the VPN. So that is the difference. So in Azure, you configure a VPN gateway, and you have configured it on the network. You now download the VPN client. You give each of your users, you ask them, you give them, put it in a link, they will download it, install, and then you deploy it for them. So for every time they have to use the VPN or access some applications that require the use of the VPN, maybe that application, the server of that application is behind the VPN VNet. Maybe it's behind a VNet that has a VPN gateway, because you can create different VNets within your network. What I mean by VNet is you can create different LAN. I just wanted to break it down. Like that. For example, for those who have worked here in the bank, like in First Bank, you know that if you have 2 branches in a state, the users in branch A cannot connect to users in branch B. Before it was possible, but later on, there was segmentation of that network. So each of those branches have their own LAN, right? But if you want branch A and B to connect, you create what we call peering. So in Azure, if you want 2 VNets to connect and talk to themselves, you create what we call peering. Is it clear now? Now, you are asking, you say, which is better, RBAC or ABAC? What is ABAC, Olu Yemisi? Yemisi, you have to, I think you should unmute. Did you mean attribute? I don't know what ABAC is. All I know is RBAC. Can you educate us? Attribute-based access control. Frankly, I don't know what attribute-based access control is, but what I know that is used now in the industry is RBAC, role-based access control. So if you say which one is better, security-wise, role-based, I would say is better, right? The attributes of a user or a service, because in role-based access control, it's not just the users that you define a role to.
Sorry, Ralph, maybe I'll try.
Please go on.
So the way is, I think I read it somewhere that Microsoft like. So attribute-based is to say for instance, people who are using a particular service. So if you go to, let's use the bank. So you could have someone who can open an account, and then you can have a teller, and then you have the head teller and maybe head customer service. So now, as customer service is role, but you see instances where maybe the head customer service also has a posting right. So once you now add that posting right to that particular person, it inherits whatever anybody who can post has. Do you get what I'm saying? So the role is, this is head customer service. However, under that head customer service, because that head customer service ordinarily does not have a cash account, it's not supposed to help. Those days we used to have instances where maybe if there's too much crowd, you can now say, oh, who has cash account? Please help us post. On the pinnacle menu, that person is the head customer service, but has a cash account, which is not supposed to be part of head customer service role. If you look at a typical head customer service, there's no cash account attached. Good. But because you need this person to be able to post, you now go and drag that form where the posting right and put under that person. So that person on what some of the things that person can do, because you added some other whatever, the standard head customer service, I think another branch will not be able to do it. Yes. So it's either you are doing attribute based in the sense that this you can when it comes to this service you can tick. So it's like you are checking boxes. So for somebody who is going to be able to post account, these are the things that the person needs to have. Great. But when you are creating a head customer service, that account ability to post cash account is not part of their normal menu. Or you just add it to be able to allow that person in smaller branches or rural branches. You have people who having some sort of multiple roles under them.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ikechi. I think your explanation is very correct because it's like adding tags. I just checked up a resource here. I put the link in the chat. We can read it up again. And it says here, attribute-based access control is an authorization system that defines access based on attributes associated with security principles, resources, and the environment of an access request. Just like what Ikechi explained, in terms of maybe, the attributes, how do I put it now? For example, a security principle can be a resource that you have given some rights to access another resource, right? Or you can elevate, for example, when you're configuring an application and you want an application to, you want a machine to auto log in into a database or an application to auto log in into a database, you can create security principles that would do that. But frankly, it's RBAC features that I'm more conversant with, right, in environments, because that is more around, it's the role-based access control has a wider applicability than the access attribute-based. Maybe that's why I didn't pick it. But thank you for bringing that. Let me see. I'm not sure. Did we answer your question? She said, so which is better? If you ask me which is better, I would say RBAC. And then you're asking, do we tag cloud resources like VM? Yeah, we do. You can tag them on databases. Yeah, you can tag them. You can tag them based on the environment where they are deployed, if it's dev or production. Then you're asking, do we need to learn a language for IAC again? And if there is, what is the most simplest language to learn? Frankly, since we are doing Azure, I will just teach you Azure ARM template, right? When we get to that level, when we get to that bridge, we'll cross it. I want you to pass your AZ900 first, right? And then we can do templating of our resource. Okay, let me just quickly show us an example of the IAC. I will log in now. Can we see my screen? Right. Yeah. So
Yes.
if you remember last week, we were trying to create a VM, a virtual machine. And then I just click. This is a portal, by the way. This is a portal. If I close this place, it's just, I'm back to the home page. Then if here, this icon here will open the Cloud Shell for you. So this is a Cloud Shell. And for the Cloud Shell, I can either use Bash or PowerShell. Bash is more for Linux environment, and PowerShell is specific to Windows. The command for Bash is different from the command or command. When I mean command, the syntax. Syntax. When I mean syntax, the vocabulary or the structure. Yeah, right. Is different, right? So if I want to do bash, I click on bash. I have to authenticate which subscription I want, and I need to create a temporary storage, right? It says Azure Cloud Shell. So this shell is actually resident in Azure. If I create a storage now, I will be able to use this shell to interact and create resources, do whatever I want to do within Azure. That is programmatically. If I want to do anything programmatically, right? Using script, for example, right? But I need to create a temporary storage. And if I close that session, my storage is gone. The storage is temporary storage, it's RAM storage. I can close this. So that's Cloud Shell. From my own local PowerShell, this is my local PowerShell. This is my local PowerShell. It's the same as what you have. This is another type of PowerShell.
We're only seeing the Azure services.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
okay. I was sharing just the tab. Let me share. Let me share the screen. So you didn't see what I said about Cloud Shell, did you? Did you see anything? Did you see the Cloud Shell demonstration?
Maybe you try it again. Now you have.
Okay. Yes. So this is a portal.
Okay.
This icon here is your
Okay.
Cloud Shell. If I click here, what this Cloud Shell does is to give me access to interact and create resources in Azure programmatically with scripting. With scripting. When I say scripting, means I'm using bash command or PowerShell command based on the command structure. For example, bash Azure AZ commands. Please, I want you to go and just bookmark this. Can you see Azure command line interface? Get started with Azure command line. Reference article list. Let me get each of these for you. Remember that at the beginning of this class, I said that learning skill in IT, you have to try. Please explain the use of the sandbox, PowerShell, bash. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Yeah. So in your learning pathway, you see sandbox that is being created. Sandbox just means temporary deployment. It's a sandbox. It's not, if you close your window, it's ended. So in the learning track, sandbox deployments are provided for students, just to test and to do the practical. For the person who asks about practical, if you go through that learning module, you will see the sandbox deployment. When you have problems, you can get back to me. So these are all commands around the use of Azure CLI, right? We call it AZ commands. There is cheat sheet you can also get. So if I need the AZ commands to interact at this level, if I need to create the bash shell, I need to create a temporary storage. And then, if I create it, I can interact, create resources, and then, whatever I create here, authenticate. It's already authenticated. That's why it's giving me the option of which subscription I want to select. But let's say I don't want to use that. I can also come here and authenticate into my Azure subscription from my laptop, from this PowerShell command. So you need to, however, install AZ command into your PowerShell, AZ module into your PowerShell. I like this ISC version of PowerShell because you can run your script here and you see the result here, right? It helps. And then you don't need to really cram too much of, if you are still learning PowerShell, you can just come here, pick a command, run it, you know, to show you the details. You see how it is run. If it shows red like this, shows that it's running in the background. I don't expect it to work. So RM, Azure RM is the old version that is being phased out. So this is being phased out. What we have now, I think, is AZ. I need to have installed AZ module here. I don't think I've done that. I will have to do that. So what we have here more is get Azure RM. So for PowerShell, to use PowerShell, it starts with a verb and then the noun follows. So usually PowerShell starts with a verb and then with a noun following. So whatever you want to do, get, set, you know, that's how you use PowerShell. And then scripting is an entirely different skill that you have to learn. Scripting is like writing a programmatic setup. Yeah, so those are 3 ways to interact with Azure. You can also interact with Azure from your Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps that's dev.azure. So this is Azure DevOps, dev.azure.com is Azure DevOps. It's taking me back somewhere. Okay, it's because I'm signing to this, but that's the portal. So you, from your Azure DevOps, you can also log in and create resource inside Azure. I will teach us all of that with time. I don't want to jump too fast. Let's just look at how to create a resource. Create. We'll go here, virtual machine. I'll select the subscription I want. I'll select, we created a resource group last week, I think. And then the name, I'll give it a name. I'll select the region. There are as many regions as you want. I think there is West Africa. Am I right? So I think there is Nigeria. Say West Africa. No. It's not there. Okay, I'm selecting UK South because it's closer to me. Availability zone. It's not all resources that has this option, but for VM, usually it will have. You can select virtual machine skill set. Remember I talked about skill set. 4 domains has to do with the data center. You know, usually these are all things around redundancy. Can select zone 1 or select all the zones. The more I select, the more money I pay. I just want to select one. The security type can just be standard. The image tells me which operating system I want on this VM. This is Ubuntu server, that is Linux. If I want Windows, I select any of the Windows product. These ones here are server OS. And the latest one is 2022. We have Windows Pro and 11 Pro. These are all your basic normal machine that you use. So if we want to deploy an application server, a DNS server, or you want to deploy your domain server, like I mentioned earlier, for your Active Directory, you come here and pick one of these. Let's say I want to just deploy my Windows 10. Then I will select the architecture. The only option here is 64 bits. And then the size of the memory I want, 8 gig. Now you can see the cost, $84 a month. If I choose this, this is actually where the compute features are. The number of processors is the 2 vCCPUs, right? And then it's an 8 gig machine. If I want 4 processors, I will pay more. So this is where your OPEX consideration comes in. Then I need to define a username. I can just set this as admin. Just set this to password $2. I'm sure a lot of us still know password $2. Password $2. Right. Okay, I cannot use this. It's reserved. This password is password $2 123. Password $2 123. So if you get a check, means it has accepted. Now remember I talked about ports on the computer. I want to allow some ports, inbound port. This RDP port is remote desktop protocol. The port number is 3389. That is what will allow me to do a remote login session into that machine. I can choose to allow other ports to open other ports, right? But the more ports you open, the more vulnerable your machine will be. So security-wise, you want to minimize the ports that you expose, right? Licensing, I can just say I confirm, and then I will come here under do next. I'll select here the hard disks, 127. There are higher ones depending on what I want, 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes. The more the cost. OS type, is it premium SSD I want or HDD? You know, just like you have for your normal system. Key management platform, I want Microsoft to manage the keys. I can come under networking. I think I've explained networking earlier to us. Remember that I said you need to define your LAN first, but in Azure, the LAN is called VNet, virtual network. So you need to, if I've not created it, I have one existing already, but let's say I have not created this, I need to create it here. You cannot deploy any resource that requires networking without a VNet, without putting it in a VNet. And then subnet is, I've not explained subnetting and IP addressing. Okay, I will just scale here. Please remind me in the future. Subnetting is when you break a large network into small bits of groups of network or IP or cluster based on the IP address. Use it also to manage access control. So this network 10.0.2.0.0/24. I can create a subnet from here or leave this as default, or you know, I will take a whole class around this. Public IP means the IP address. I'm going to assign a public IP address to this machine. Public IP address means that the machine will be accessible from the internet. If I do not create a public IP address, it is only this IP address that will be used to identify the machine. So for every machine that you are able to reach on the internet, means it is exposed to the internet. There is a public IP address that routes to it one way or the other. NIC is a security group. These are all resources around defining how you want this machine to be secured. There is a security group that you define within the VNet. So for here, it's just basic. It's at this level you define protocols that will be used. I can say none. If I say none, there will not be any security group, but it says all ports on the virtual machine may be exposed to the public internet. Remember that I have a public IP. This is a security risk. So it has already flagged this for me. So if I'm an administrator, without the security engineer coming to oversee what I'm doing, I need to be sure that I take note of this check. There can be policy within the Azure subscription that will prevent any resource from being deployed without selecting a security group. That is the policy thing I mentioned earlier. So, but because this is just for testing, I will just say delete public address when VM is deleted. Yes. Because if I do not delete it, public IP address costs money. This public IP address costs money. I can do next still. So these are all just information to type to the machine. I don't want to go too deep here. Monitoring, I don't want to go too deep. You can just attach tag. Somebody asked question around tag. This is where you define your tag. I can say review. Now, usually, if all that I've said from here all the way to this point are okay, this validation check will come out green. If it is not okay, it will come out red, and I have to check why it is not okay. So the validation check has come out passed, and if I click create now, it will create this virtual machine for me. However, the cost of this virtual machine is $0.116. That's cents per hour. So after this class, if what happened?
Hi, Ralph. Are you still here? I think maybe Ralph has lost internet. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I can
Yes,
hear
we can
you.
hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, let's give him a few minutes. Maybe his network went down. Not sure what was it. It's past 10, but this is typically not how we close. So I think maybe something happened to his network. Listen, just give me a while. I'll
Hello,
try and contact him on this side. Yeah.
hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Frankly, I don't know what happened. I just,
Yeah, we can hear you.
We lost you.
yeah, I'm sorry. I think my network provider, there was a network glitch. Yeah, that is system for you. So I'm sorry about that.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me just. Okay, I think it's. Are we still recording? Okay, still recording. Yeah, so this is the resource now. It comes here and shows me that the resource has been deployed. Remember that I have to deploy it into a resource group. This is the name of the resource group. It gives me basic information. And then this deployment will also be given a name normally if I'm deploying, for example, from this is the name of the deployment. If I want to trace or audit this deployment later, I can use this name and search that. I also want to show us something. Okay, let me just, it says go to the resource. So this is a machine, virtual machine. This is the name of the virtual machine. The left plane here gives you all the options to configure or to manage the virtual machine all the way down. Everything here. So if now this is where the infrastructure as a service comes in. In this case, the cloud provider has given me access to create a virtual machine here. But if I'm doing an IaaS, IaaS mode, if I'm subscribing to the IaaS model here, I will have to manage all this virtual machine myself. I'll have to manage the configuration around, its health, when I log in, because if I need to log in, I will come here and click connect. This is the public IP address that it was assigned. If I need to connect to this machine, all I do is to download RDP file. I will come here. It's here. See it here. I will double click. I'll just click. You can come to details. This is just your normal remote desktop. You do connect. You can see the IP address 20.77.67.100 full column 3389. This is the port. This is the IP address. IP address is like the postal address. Just-in-time policy, unable to configure just-in-time policy on the IP address. Prerequisite could not be configured. Azure needs to configure some features in order to connect to the. Okay, so there is a change the port for connecting to this menu connect page. Check access, cannot verify. Now there is a problem with this setup in terms of the port. I'll have to troubleshoot this. What isn't, let me come here to networking. Now, under the network on which this VM is attached is shown here. This is a network interface. The network interface is like a card that handles the network connectivity on the machine, right? It is also here that I'll need to come and check the port that is opened or closed. I'm not sure. So by moving now, as you open the blade, you keep moving into different resources. If you want to know which resource you are in, just come here and check. This is the network interface. Everything here, it looks similar. It looks like I'm still on the virtual machine, but now I'm on the network interface. If I click here, I will see the network security group if I have defined any. But remember, I didn't select any, so it's showing none. If I had a DNS server, it will show here. There's no DNS. IP configuration. IP config. I should be able to access this machine. I don't know why. If I close this, I'm back to the virtual machine. I can come here and check my virtual network and see if there is any security setting that is blocking the port. So this is how the virtual machine looks, and all the configuration for virtual machine will be done from here. Somebody asked about firewall. From here, you can get to, there's no firewall, right? But you can add a firewall. Firewall is a separate resource in itself. I want to check for the port and see. Come to my subnets, check the default subnet. If it doesn't work, I'm just going to delete it and recreate another one. Then in the next class, show us what I've done. But just to explain a little bit more, this plane shows you the resource group. The status of the machine shows it's running. These are all the parameters we defined earlier. Sometimes you might need to refresh this portal in order to get the up-to-date information. Let me try and use this past 10 really. Remote desktop on my system. I can just come here and drop that public IP address. I try to connect. I think that port is, yeah, that port is not, that port is still closed. The RDP port I defined is still closed. I need to do a bit of troubleshooting here. Resource health. Remember I talked about resource health. You can come here and try to diagnose the problem. There are troubleshooting tools that they provide for you to check. There's not much information. Boot diagnosis. So this is the machine. I can't log into it, but it shows me that it's on. This is the machine. This is the screenshot of the machine. The machine is actually running, but I just can't log into it yet. I'll have to find out why I can't log in. If, let's say, I forget my password, I can reset my password from here. I can come here and reset my password. Let's say I forgot the password I set at the beginning. I can reset it here. all these change configuration management are part of what one will need to do if to manage the VM, and that's what you do when you are running an IaaS model in the cloud. But if it's Azure Virtual Desktop, that is a PaaS solution. You have access to the same machine box, but Microsoft is managing it for you. Your own is just to use it. Then for those who were, the person who was asking question around infrastructure as code, this export template is the infrastructure as code of this virtual machine. If I do export template now, it will generate the code for this virtual machine. So this thing you are seeing here, we're going to learn this. I'm going to teach us this thing you are seeing here is called the ARM template. Everything here is called the ARM template. So if I wanted to deploy this machine and I didn't want to go through clicking one step, second step, one step, I can just come here, define this code, right? Use my VS Code. Where's my VS Code? Use my VS Code from Azure DevOps or from, there is another resource called you'll notice that I duplicated my tab. I can come here, go to the home page. Oh, I don't have enough memory. My system is loaded. I can come here to go back. I can come here and type template. See template, deploy a custom template. So here it's asking me to deploy a custom template. You can go to GitHub. I'm sure we already have GitHub account. If you go to GitHub and you go to Azure, there are resources, templates for Azure here. So I'll drop this in the chat. I want you to subscribe to this, or you follow. You can just do follow. Or you watch. You watch this. There are about 7,600 followers. Microsoft Azure. So this is the repository of different things around Azure. This is a storehouse around Azure. You can come here and then you can type under this repository. I can look for quick start templates. So for those who want to learn infrastructure as code ARM templates, there are different templates here you can use for your deployment. Quick start templates. These are different templates. I'm not sure this is the one I'm looking for. This repository is different. That's not what I'm looking for. This repository belongs to this guy. I can go back. I come here. I can type here quick templates and just type quick. That's it. Azure quick template, this one. So these are different templates for different resources in Azure. Quick start. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. So a different template for different resources in Azure. Data lake, data devices. If you come here, you can search for virtual machine. Can you see the virtual machine here? That's it. This is the bicep one. You can see different ones. ARM template will be there. ARM template is the .json. Normally in software, the type of a file, what ends the extension will tell you the type of the file. So .json file is what ARM template is. It's let me not bog us with that. I will just explain all of that later. So I was trying to explain. Oh, memory. I was trying to explain the infrastructure as code for the VMware that we deployed. My system is running low on memory. I need to. So can you see what is happening now? The RAM on my system is getting overloaded. So I cannot open some web pages. You see, so that's just how so everything I'm doing is limited to the hardware of this system. From here also I can redeploy. Apologies, my system is slowing down. It's the RAM is slowing. I have so many things open here trying to explain. I'll just delete this resource. All I did is to just come here, delete. So in your own portal too, when you log in and you want to you create anything, you can delete it immediately. It won't cost you anything. Select and then click delete. So it will delete it, and I'm not paying for anything. I've played around with the portal, I've played around with the cloud, and I'm not paying anything. That's why the cloud skill, it's a very easy skill to get into now, right? You can do a lot of things by just playing around and deleting. All right, I think we'll call it a day here.
Okay, Ralph. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for the sacrifice. And
Yeah, I just wanted to show us how I deleted. I just came here, I deleted. Right, it's already deleted. So to tell me resource not found. Okay,
okay, maybe if you take just the two questions, then we can wrap it up. There are two questions. One thing, does Azure have the option of BYOIP? I guess that's bring your own IP address.
Bring your own IP or bring your own license.
It's IP. I see. It said BYOIP. I suspect it's bring your own IP. Or Ajiboye, is there a different meaning to the BYOIP?
No, it's bring your own IP. Yeah.
So I'm guessing.
You of course, if you bring your own IP, is it public IP or?
Yeah, public IP.
Yeah, you can. You have to register it with them. Of course, a lot of companies have their own public IPs they want to use. So yeah, it's possible. So you have to set up. They have private links now that they create for companies also. It's possible.
Okay, so the very last one is, can PowerShell script be used across different operating systems?
No, PowerShell is only for Windows, but Bash can be used across all operating systems. For example, my Windows now, I have Bash. I have Bash here. This is okay. I've not installed Bash If I had installed Bash, you would have seen it among my options here. But so what I have is Ubuntu. I have Ubuntu. If I click on Ubuntu, what you're going to see is Ubuntu. Okay, I can go to my GitHub. This is Bash. This is Bash. All right. This is Bash. So Bash can be used across different operating systems, but not Windows PowerShell. These are interview questions. Whoever asks that question has attended one interview, maybe. All right.
Okay.
Okay. I want to wish us a happy new year. Any other question?
None. I think that we'll call it a wrap for this one. Again, thank you, Ralph, and happy new year, everybody.
Thank you. I want to encourage us. Please just study ahead of these classes. It will help you to ask more targeted questions, like Yemisi was asking. I like some of our questions. You know, it will prompt me to dig deeper for you guys. You know, so if you don't ask me questions, I will just operate more at the superficial too. Yeah. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. It's been almost 2 hours, 30 minutes here. Hopefully, do we meet next week, or are we okay every week? That's my commitment to you, but
Yes, please. Next week is fine.
all right. Okay, Damilon. All right. Good night. We must
Good night.
pass the exam.
Good
Yes.
night. Thank you, Ralph.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good
Bye.
night. Bye.
Everybody, happy new year.
Happy
Good
New
night,
Year.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much, Ralph.
You're welcome.
You are blessed.
Thank you.
God bless you.